On this Martin Luther King weekend, when we begin reading the book of Shmot, Exodus, we might pause and wonder, how is it that people like Moses in the book of Exodus and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who in our contemporary history, were able to lead people from such situations of deep oppression into places of freedom? And the answer might be that it was in their mindset, their mentality of freedom. One thing we might notice was that Moses was raised in the palace. He was saved by his mother, who put him in a basket in the Nile, and then adopted into the palace, so that he actually grew up in a life of relative privilege, which afforded him the ability to escape from the slave mentality, which Rabbi Ibn Ezra, a medieval commentator, said that God caused Moses to grow up in the home of royalty so that his soul would be accustomed to a lighter sense of learning and behavior and not feel lowly in the house of slavery. Many times we see later in the story of Exodus that the slaves will question Moses when he brings the message of freedom. How can we go? How can it be us? Wouldn't it be better if we were in Egypt in the certain circumstances, even as miserable as they were, as opposed to in the uncertainty of freedom? It's this ability to have the mindset of the palace life that enables Moses to imagine freedom for his people. And this mindset is what allows him to truly bring the people to freedom. Whereas a leader who had grown up in slavery might not have been able to possess the strength of character and the courage and the imagination that were stolen from them by slavery in order to lead them beyond. And similarly, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, in his I Have a Dream speech, so famously spoke about this dream mindset, this dream mentality, which he grew up with in his own Baptist church upbringing, where his father would preach about freedom and about being saved and their faith all the time, which would allow the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., even as a kid, to grow up with this mentality of the possibility of salvation, the possibility of freedom beyond what he and his people were experiencing. And so he writes in his speech, "We refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we've come to cash the check, a check that will give us, upon demand, riches of freedom and security and justice." He refused to believe in that kind of mentality of oppression. Rather, he opened his mind, kept his mind open, and encouraged others to have the mentality that they just needed to cash that check of freedom and it would come to them. Similarly, he says, "Let us not wallow in the valley of despair, so that even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream that is deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." And later he says, "This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out the mountain of despair, out of the mountain of despair, a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will go on to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day." And so just like Moses, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was able to maintain this mentality of belief, of faith, and of freedom, a free mindset that brought him indeed closer to his goals, just as Moses was able to, with God's help, bring the people from slavery to freedom. And so we too, in our own day, must believe in the possibilities of justice, the possibilities of freedom, of a world that is better than the one we live in today. And only with this belief and faith will we truly achieve our goals and reach Tikkun Olam, a repairing of the world. Shabbat Shalom.